Welcome to Beyond Belief, Tales of Religious Exodus, where we delve into the personal journeys of people who've left fundamentalist religions. In this series, we explore their experiences within religion, their journey out, and how they found meaning and healing on the other side.
All right, Zalman, welcome to Beyond Belief. And your story is interesting because you were a flavor of Orthodox Jew I've never really had a chance to interview too much, which is Chabad, but not just any Chabad, but Chabad on shlichus, which means you were out there missionizing in some far-off country. And that's super cool to me, very, very exotic and very different. Chabad was the arch nemesis of Aish Torah, so we never interacted really at all. And so I'm very curious about what that life was. So to start out, what country were you actually born and raised in, and what was that like for you to be out there?
I grew up in Vilnius, Lithuania. My parents moved there to open a Chabad center there, which is a center for Jewish people in the country to come to and grow their connection with Judaism. My parents are there to find other Jews who are secular, no connection with Judaism. Maybe they barely knew that they're Jewish. They knew that their grandmother is Jewish or something. And my parents are there to bring them closer to, and to make them Orthodox in some way, or at least to have them keep different commandments and things like that.
Nice. And I'm curious because famously you get almost like assigned a country. You don't select a country. It's kind of like you just go there. So like, just for some context, like how old were your parents? Where were they before that point? How was it decided that they should go to Lithuania?
Okay, so my parents were in their mid-20s or early 20s. They were assigned, they reached out to the Chabad headquarters in New York. This is right before the Chabad Rebbe passed. So he was not really in charge of taking care of that part, but there were people within the Chabad headquarters who you reach out to and you say, hey, I'm looking for a spot to move to. In some way, it's a little bit almost like looking for a regular, any job. They give you some options and you choose one of them, you check it out, or the community there, you check it out and you see if that's a good fit. Both of my parents, interestingly enough, said before, as they were dating, they were like, we want to go on shlichut, but we're not going to former Soviet Union. And they ended up in the former Soviet Union, which is interesting. But they checked out a few different places and they figured that Lithuania was a good fit, and they moved there. The way it works now is that you get to know someone who is a Chabad shliach somewhere. There are WhatsApp groups where someone's like, hey, I'm looking for a spot where, to move to. And it's just like job searching or anything like that.
So it's like, because I've been to places where there's like only one Chabad rabbi, and it seems like before they were there was no one. Is it now that like all the places are covered, so now you're like doubling up, you're like adding to the community by being the second or third rabbi who shows up there?
Something like that, yeah. If you're going to a country that already has a Chabad shliach there, then you would reach out to them and have them agree to you coming down, checking it out, and seeing if you're a good fit. So, yeah.
Interesting. How common is it? I think in my mind, like every single Chabad person or family goes on shlichus. How common is it to do that versus to just, I don't know, stick around Brooklyn where it kind of originates, I suppose?
So it really depends on the family. I think so far in my family, for example, majority of those who are married are already either on shlichus or searching for a spot to go to. There are families that there's no one within that family who moved out. The percentage is probably lower, probably 15, 20%, but I'm just guessing. I'm not sure. Most people do not move on shlichus, just simply number-wise, there aren't enough spaces to go to. But it's pretty common for that to be some yeshivas, some religious schooling, their whole goal is to send you out on shlichus. Their whole goal is like, we are a place that will make sure that you move there after you finish schooling here. So probably the results there are higher, but the numbers are not as high as they would seem.
Okay, very cool. I appreciate you giving me that sort of background context. Usually, this is all about just your experience, but I appreciate some of the backdrop.
Sure.
So, what was it like for you to be born and raised in Lithuania? Um, in generally not, I'm assuming not in the Jewish community, right? It was just your parents and your family.
So Lithuania at that time did not have any other religious Orthodox Jews. So we were the only family there that was doing that. So that affected things like even kosher food. There was none available there. We were an example to other kids in the school. My parents opened a Jewish school there. So I was always taught like we are an example to them of what a good Jew is. So we're always a little bit on. We're always putting on a little presentation for them and, being leading by example. And so, yeah, with kosher food, it was just a lack of kosher food. My dad would go visit New York at least twice a year, once for the big conference of shluchim that takes place. There are a few thousand shluchim come in from around the world. And another time of the year would be Gimel Tammuz, when the day of the passing of the Chabad Rebbe. He would bring back frozen pizza, and that was something that was exciting for us as kids, something kosher that we don't have locally that we couldn't get. Now it's a little easier with, there are some companies that send out frozen foods throughout Europe, kosher foods, and you could get that. But not having any religious friends within the community meant that we weren't allowed to visit friends. There was no such thing as going over to a friend's house for a visit. I remember once I did that as a kid. My parents let me go to a friend's house, and we watched some kids' movies or something. I don't remember exactly what it was. And that was it. My parents were like, okay, you're not going to them, they're coming to you. So we had some friends actually come over, and I had a friend who would come over on a regular basis, and he started to become actually a little more religious just by hanging out with us, until a cousin of his was like, hey, calm it down. You don't want to do this. You don't want to become too religious. So stay out of their house. So that was.
So he actually stayed. So it affected the friendship. It wasn't just he stopped being so religious. He actually had to be less friendly with you.
I believe so. Yeah. It convinced them out of coming over on a regular basis, staying for Shabbat, staying for long times, and just he started to become more religious. So, his family was like, just take it easy.
So what was it like for you? Because it sounds like overall a very lonely existence, and so much hardship as far as like what other people just take for granted, just like going out for pizza. You guys could never do that. But at the same time, it was all framed as for a higher cause and for a mission, and you're special because you're doing the holiest work, I'm assuming. And so what was that? How did all of those contradictory chips land for you when you were still a kid?
So when you say lonely, first of all, I have 10 siblings now, right? So growing up, there was another one every year or two. So it definitely wasn't lonely. It was a happening place. But this was the reality that I knew. So it wasn't like, oh, I'm missing something here. I did have friends in school. We just weren't allowed to hang out at their places. But it was always busy. It was always happening. We were always inviting people to our house for Shabbat meals, for holidays. My parents were always hosting big events. There was always something to help with set up or talk to people or put on tefillin on them when they come in, offering them a kippah to wear, and just kind of spreading the Judaism to them. So it was never lonely or anything like that. There was always people around.
Yeah, that makes sense. What did the school? I was wondering about the school. So your parents created their own school. Did it have like a well-rounded education? I mean, obviously there was probably the Jewish component, but did the other stuff that you would expect a school to teach? Were they teaching that as well? Were they teaching that too, or did they bring in outside teachers for like the secular subjects? How did that work?
Yeah, so they opened a school that just allowed Jewish kids in. There were one or two classes that were Judaism. The rest was just regular schooling. They got local teachers, local principals. Everything was local, up to standard there. So it wasn't really different from a regular school, from another school, besides for those 1 or 2 hours of Jewish studies, as well as extracurricular studies that were Jewish after school things that, you could join in and get prizes for learning extra or something like that. Otherwise, it was just a regular school. Regular grades. It was smaller because the Jewish community in Lithuania is small, about 5,000 Jews. And, not everyone's sending their kids to the Jewish school in Vilnius. But otherwise, it was, I would say, just a regular school.
Was it coed? Classes,
Yes.
boys and girls together? It was
Yes.
coed.
So my parents did take me out of that school at the age of 9 or 10, I believe. And my younger siblings after that had to leave that school already when they were like 7 or 8 because it's co-ed. It doesn't have that much Jewish education. And they moved me into online school once that became available.
Okay. Yeah, because that was the thing, right? That kids from all over the world study together because they're all sons of shluchim, and you're basically being homeschooled in a way, but your parents are assigning that to like a centralized teaching system. What was it like to be learning online to such an extent? Was it hours and hours just in front of a screen, or is it homeschooling light?
Yeah, so it depends. It started off small. I was on the first class when it started. It was first over the phone, and then we got onto computers with webcams. It would take, at some point, it became a full day from 9 a.m. to 3, 4 p.m., I believe. Full studies, just Jewish studies, no secular studies at all. I had friends all over Europe that were in class with me, and I didn't meet them in person until a few years later. It was an interesting experience. It was fun. Online school means you could play a little hooky or things like that as well. I don't think you end up learning as much as you would in a classroom with friends. It doesn't have the social component to it as well that you would have in a school. So it comes with its the issues. But being that that's the only option that's around for shluchim who don't want to send their kids to a regular school, it was a good option for that.
Yeah. Because I mean, I watched like my own kids go through like during COVID, just even a small amount of like online schooling, and your brain starts to melt out of your ears. Is how I experienced it. So
Yeah.
it's just impressive that you guys managed to just be on it for that many hours a day.
Yeah, I mean, you start to learn how to use other tabs on the computer as well. You're searching things up. You get to know the computer a little better. They set up a system where it closes any other tabs, so you learn how to get around that. You get to know the computer a little better than others would. But it was part of growing up and having classmates online. It was a classroom just online, and in some way we did it.
Yeah, I hear. So overall, was it working for you, this way of life, this unique way of being Orthodox Jewish in the middle of Lithuania, progressing a little bit maybe into teenagehood, it was still working out for you or not?
I believe it was working out for me. Now, when I turned 13, right after my bar mitzvah, my parents sent me to religious schooling abroad. They tried that first with my older brother. They sent him to a Jewish school at 9 years old. So he left home and went to Moscow he would come visit home every few months, but he really stayed with the family there. And my parents were like, okay, we're not doing that again. So me as the second one in the family, they were like, okay, we'll wait until he's 13. And that's exactly what everyone else in my family did. So after the age of 13, I was already living abroad in different yeshivas, religious schools. But religious life did work for me until as a kid. I never really questioned it. It was just something that's how you're supposed to be. We were an example to others. In some way, we were better than others. We were doing the right thing. We were born into the right way of life and the right family to do it. Because, even other Jews in Lithuania, they didn't know, they didn't have the Judaism that we had. They didn't know much about it. We were teaching them. So we were the lucky ones. And that was just the way of life that we grew up with.
For sure. So you ended up, language-wise, you ended up speaking Lithuanian, if that's actually what it's called, and then I'm assuming Yiddish, English. Eventually, like when you went to school, did you go to school in Russia too? Did you learn Russian there?
So interestingly enough, the Jewish community in Lithuania, especially back then, spoke more Russian than Lithuanian. They liked Russian more. So I grew up not really speaking much Lithuanian. I grew up speaking Russian. With my parents, we spoke Yiddish, mixed with Russian because it wasn't the best Yiddish, mixed with English, mixed with a little Hebrew, everything together. I grew up, my English, I didn't really speak much English until the age of 9 or 10. for the online school, my mom would sit with me for the first few months and just help me. She would translate for me anything that I didn't understand, because I didn't really grow up with speaking English. My parents spoke to each other in English, but otherwise, yeah, I grew up with a mix of some Yiddish, Hebrew as well, because we had Israelis who would come to the Chabad house, as well as, some Lithuanian.
So interesting, right? Because Chabad serves that very interesting mix of serving the local population and anyone who happens to be traveling through. It's like that classic dual
That's
role.
right.
Two meta questions for you again about Chabad. One is, what are the kiruv like tactics that Chabad like employs? Right, ultimately their goal is also to make people religious. I'm very familiar with like the tricks and techniques that Aish and its followers would do. Did Chabad have a way in which it tried to make people more religious?
So it's interesting because I went to a school where everyone is becoming Chabad shluchim there, and they didn't really teach us methods of how to do it. And even checking with my parents, and they're leading by example and seeing what their methods were to just have an open, encouraging environment, warm place for people to go to, and slowly to teach them Judaism. And then there was one method here where they would try to send someone to yeshiva abroad. Okay, and once you move to Israel or London or New York, which has a larger religious community, the hope was that they would become religious there. We were always taught how that Aish actually has better methods. That's what I heard that growing up. They're like, oh, Aish has like a system to it, and they'll also, one thing we were told that Aish, if a person is not becoming religious enough fast enough, they'll kind of drop them. And we were told, Chabad is better because we're not trying to make someone religious. We're just trying to have them do an extra mitzvah, an extra commandment. So we'll have the same people coming for years and years, and they won't progress much, but it's okay because they're doing something.
And it's so funny because my father, who hated Chabad, he would do the exact same reverse. It's Chabad, they'll just let somebody come for weeks and months and years, and the guy won't change at all. And what is the point of that even, right? So it was the same exact thing that voiced critically. I'm curious though, if Aish did have better methods, why didn't Chabad take any of Aish's methods and adopt them for their own? Is it because they disagreed philosophically, or?
I think the method of, if someone's not becoming religious, we'll drop them. They didn't like that. Part of the belief is that every mitzvah counts. The Chabad Rebbe would say, every single thing counts. So if someone lights Shabbat candles at the beginning of Shabbat, that's enough. They did their thing as well. Ideally, we would want them to be religious, but if this is something that they do for the rest of their lives, that's better than, we're not going to drop them. But every shliach and every person has their own little tactics and things. I've heard of Chabad people that would, if someone's dating a non-Jewish person, they'll be like, okay, how do we get them to separate? Okay, let's send one of them, the Jewish one, to Israel. Let's have them win a lot or some sort of raffle and have them travel somewhere for a few months and kind of separate them. So it really depends. Some people do have methods, sneakier methods. Some will just kind of be an open place for people to join, and some people become religious and some don't, and that's how it is.
So wait, I love that little story. There was a rigged raffle, like you would do a raffle, but you would pre-select the winner?
Yeah. So this is one I read in a book called Cult Busters. I don't remember the exact name of the person, but it was a Chabad person who would do cult busting, which is ironic. He would get people out of other cults and bring them into either Chabad or, just stay out of other cults, Moonies, Scientology, anything like that. And he would also try to separate people who are dating non-Jews. And they rigged some sort of raffle. They made someone win something to go to Israel for a month, and they ended up separating.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that sounds weird. Aish Torah had these stories of like Mayor Schuster. He was our big hero, and he would be at the Kotel, the Western Wall, and somebody once came up to basically Noah Weinberg. Suddenly, he would drag people over to Noah Weinberg's office. Noah Weinberg would debate them. The founder of Aish Torah, he would debate them on philosophy and like prove that God existed, and they would immediately become religious or whatever. But one guy he dragged into the office one time, and Noah Weinberg's talking to him for like 15 minutes, and then the guy's like, "Yeah, but where's the bathroom?" So he had asked for the bathroom, and Schuster was like, "Let me show you," and it threw him in some rabbi's office. And so this was celebrated, right? To me, I look at that now and it's like the level of manipulation to show people the truth, but you have to manipulate them that much. Like what even is going on?
Yeah.
But that was kind of the folklore, right? That
Right.
underlay what was happening there. So you mentioned how Aish was perceived. How Chabad is just so different in other parts of Orthodox Judaism. How did you guys see the rest of Orthodox Jews or Hasidim, specifically of other sects of Hasidim? Like, how did you guys see the rest of the world?
So obviously we were better than everyone else.
That's a given. Yeah.
Right. So anyone who's more religious than you is crazy, and anyone who's less religious than you is way too modern, and they're doing things wrong as well. So that was kind of how we perceived it. It was, the Hasidim or the Satmar, for example, was just too strict and too crazy, and then modern Orthodox was just too modern and not doing the right thing. And that's how it was perceived. And obviously, there was also a thought, they said it in a joking way, but everyone's either Chabad or will be Chabad at some point. That was the thought. And so there's also a movement to bring others into Chabad from other sects within Orthodox Judaism as well. We would have guys in yeshiva would go every night or every weekend to other yeshivas in nearby and try to teach Chabad philosophy to the students there and try to bring them closer to Chabad.
What would make you be Chabad? Did you have to just believe in the teachings of the Lubavitcher rabbis and read the Tanya, which is the main Chabad book, more than other books? Like I always thought of I've never thought of switching from one Hasidus to the other, from one Hasidic sect to the next. It always occurred to me as kind of like you're just either born to it or you're Baal Tshuva and you go to the first one. But what does crossing the aisle even look like in that space?
Yeah, so this is a real debate within Chabad as well, because you actually have to, Chabad believes that you have to eat Chabad shechita. So like an animal has to be slaughtered within the Chabad way, and it has to be slaughtered by a Chabad person. So what is a Chabad person? Is someone who goes to mikvah, which is a ritual bath. They go to mikvah every single morning. Someone who studies Hasidus, which is the Chabad philosophy in this case. And I think someone who just follows the Chabad teachings, follows the Chabad Rebbe. I don't know if there's a defining conversion system here, but someone who just considers himself Chabad and does what other Chabad people do. People will change the way they dress into the Chabad way and just send their kids to Chabad schools.
Were there some subsects of Chabad? Because I've been taught there's a messianic sect of Chabad, non-messianic. Israeli Chabad always seemed even crazier than regular Chabad. Are there subsects within Chabad that you guys perceived?
Yeah, so there's the messianic sect, which believes that the Chabad Rebbe will be Mashiach. He'll come back as the Messiah. Now, pretty much everyone in Chabad believes that. There are those who believe that it should be kept quiet, and there are those who believe that this is something we have to scream from the rooftops. And that's where the divide really is. Then there are people who believe also that the Chabad Rebbe is alive in a physical body, and he's still alive. That's a very small minority. But within the messianic one or the anti-messianic one, my parents were the anti-messianic, so they didn't believe that.
Which meant they were just keeping it under wraps, mostly.
Yeah, and so much so that I didn't get the memo that we were supposed to believe that he's alive. Okay, so I was in yeshiva and all my friends were like, yeah, Chabad Rebbe. Sorry, not that he's alive. Sorry, that he's going to be Mashiach.
He's going to be the Messiah.
Yeah. And everyone was talking about it. And I was like, wait, he's not. And I found out later that, yeah, my family does believe it. They just never came up.
Fascinating. So you've done the yeshiva thing, you're bought into the system and overall. So I guess what happened next you're not religious anymore in the slightest. And I'm curious what that part of the arc ended up being for you.
Yeah. So I finished the whole system. I went to yeshiva from the age of 13 through 21. I did, everyone in Chabad does smicha as well, which is you get your rabbinic certificate. They fast track it and make it kind of simple so that everyone in the Chabad Rebbe wanted everyone to finish it. So they make it as simple as possible.
Does it include, if I could just interrupt for a second, is it because Chabad are famously self-sufficient in how they do things? Like you learn how to slaughter animals, you learn how to circumcise, That's always what I was under the impression. Did you learn all of those things as part of becoming a rabbi?
No, my father, before he moved to Lithuania, learned how to slaughter, but that was because he was moving to a country without kosher meat. So that is something he would sometimes we would get chickens and just slaughter them in the backyard because we just needed chickens for food. So that's not something we learned. No, it was the laws of Shabbat, the laws of kosher. I'm already forgetting. It's been a few years, but just a few
Probably
subjects.
Nida. Yeah.
Not even need them.
Actually, maybe not,
even
right?
need
Because you
them.
weren't married to expose you to that.
So none of
Yeah.
the purity laws that have to do with after marriage, but just those subjects which are not relevant for becoming a rabbi in like a Chabad community in Lithuania or anywhere else. Hey, it's important information, but it's not about kiruv. It's not about how to teach others to become religious, how to give a sermon. None of that was being taught. That's something you have to kind of pick up once you leave. How to fundraise, none of that. But so I finished the system, and once I did, I can't say I was questioning much, but I think once you kind of finish and you realize, okay, what's next? There was a question of, do I want to do this? Why am I doing these daily rituals? Why am I keeping kosher, Shabbat, daily prayers? And the realization that, oh, I'm doing it because God wants me to. And then realizing that, well, God is great. He's bigger than this. He'll be okay if I don't do this. He doesn't need me. He doesn't need little me to do any of this for him to be happy. So if I don't do this, he'll be fine. I'll be fine. There's no issue with that. In fact, anytime I studied Chassidut, which is the Chabad philosophy, I would come to that realization even in a higher sense of like, he's really that great that there's no need. So I think that's how it started for me. And slowly I started to let go of certain observances, little prayers here and there that I would just stop doing and start forgetting to do on a daily basis or stop caring about. And then to a point where I realized I'm not even putting on tefillin anymore, which is a very important thing within Chabad. So Chabad, on Fridays, we would go out in the streets and ask people, hey, excuse me, are you Jewish? And if someone says, yeah, if a guy says, yes, I'm Jewish, we'd be like, hey, do you want to, let's put on tefillin. And then you would explain to them what tefillin is, or they already knew, and then you would put it on with them. I hated that whole thing. I did not enjoy doing what we called mitzvah. I didn't enjoy street missionizing. But being that tefillin was that important within Chabad, I realized, well, if I'm not putting on tefillin, why am I keeping kosher or Shabbat? So I pretty much dropped it a few weeks after I stopped putting on tefillin. Interestingly enough, my first time eating non-chalav Yisrael, which is dairy that is not supervised by a Jewish person, was together in the bacon sandwich that I bought. I was like, okay, I'm gonna try something non-kosher, and I just went for it. And I went kind of 0 to 100 or 100 to 0, and I kind of dropped it and didn't look back, at least outwardly. It took me another 2 years to be comfortable with myself and show my true colors and beliefs to my family, to my friends. I would still wear the whole garb for 2 years. And within those 2 years also, I started actually questioning Judaism, God, Rebbe, within Chabad, what's it all about? And I came to the realization that all of it is not based on reality. A lot of the things that were taught to me, 3 million Jews saw the Torah being given. And then once you realize that's all written in the book, we have no evidence of that. Other religions have similar claims about their religion and how that came about. It kind of just started falling apart also in a belief way, and it became an agnostic atheist. So I don't believe in a God. It took me a minute to realize that I was trying to figure it out because, I grew up with so many miracle stories of the Rebbe. The Rebbe would heal people. The Rebbe brought people back from the dead. I mean, not fully from the dead, but the belief was someone died and they would go up and the Rebbe would meet them in heaven and be like, oh no, go back. And the person would. So there were so many stories that I grew up with, people who didn't have kids for 10 years and suddenly had a baby, or someone was dying and the Rebbe said, well, I don't see any, cancer in you. And then the next day they went for scans and there was no cancer, things like that. It took me longer to get rid of those stories and be like, well, there's confirmation bias. There are thousands and thousands of people who the Rebbe said, you'll have this miracle, you have that miracle, and they still didn't see it, and they're trying to interpret it now and be like, well, what did the Rebbe mean? Maybe he meant something else. Maybe we're just not understanding exactly what he meant. So once I dropped all of that, it became clear to me that it's just like any other religion, not based on reality. And that's when the guilt also fully went away. We're just humans, we're all doing our thing.
Fascinating. Okay, so if I can summarize the arc, it starts out with sort of a philosophical transcendence of like God is bigger than any like minutia.
Yeah.
And then it proceeds to, but hiding it from people. And I'd love to talk more about that. And in that process, there's more of a deconstruction of the kind of the foundations of it all. Like, does God even exist? Can the Rebbe really work these miracles? Because that was a huge part. I remember even from the outside, Rebbe miracles were such a part of Chabad culture. We had neighbors who had twins, and the story was that they only became religious because they couldn't conceive, and then the rabbi gave them his grape juice or something like that, and they drank it, and then they had twins. So that proved, and they actually became religious. They became Chabad because of that story.
Yeah.
I think I heard a story of people, they had some leftover grape juice in the fridge, and then they accidentally drank it, and they still had another baby. That was another raised on. So all of that sort of deconstructing the lore, if you will, around it, and then the guilt that comes along with that.
Yep.
Does that kind of summarize the arc?
Yeah. I was first leaving in a more like, okay, I don't need this anymore, but there is a God, he wants me to do these things. And then realization of like, no, there is no God. The Rebbe was just a regular person, just doing his thing. I think he meant well, but the miracle stories were just stories. I mean, things happen in life and unusual things happen, and that's just how these stories came about.
For sure. So I'd love to dive into a little more deeper into each of those stages that you described. So there's this like, I'm bigger than this. I'm curious if there's more still though, because a lot of people, they just keep doing the thing because it like feels good. You put on tefillin and it's like a nice ritual or whatever. Was there something that was still pulling you away, or like an inconvenience, or like this is annoying, or why am I doing this? You hear what I'm saying about like, okay, I don't need to do it for God, but God does enjoy it. It's like the icing on the cake. So what was it that still like you forgot to do tefillin for several weeks? Like, was there something else there?
It was definitely the inconvenience and the pointlessness of it all. Religious life is all encompassing. You have daily prayers could take 2 hours of your day, simply even going to synagogue, going to mikvah before within Chabad to the ritual bath, going to a minyan, praying with 10 other men, Shabbat rituals of you're not even allowed to turn on a light or carry a bottle of water to the park when it's hot outside. That's just the simple things, it goes. Someone told me, actually, a woman once told me that when she was pregnant, she was religious. I mean, she's religious. And when she was pregnant, she told me like, wow, a rabbi told me that I'm allowed to do anything that I need on Shabbat that has to do with the baby, even though it's technically not allowed on Shabbat. And I was like, well, shouldn't that, the fact that you need permission from a rabbi to do what's needed for your health, for the health of a baby, it's already problematic. So Orthodox Judaism had so many rules, so many things, thousands of rules. When are you allowed to eat? You have to plan your daily menu around it, because you can't, during lunch, you don't want to eat meat, because what if you want to have something that's dairy within 6 hours? So you can't have dairy for 6 hours after meat. So many rules, So the realization that it's not needed or it's unnecessary, or I think just kind of needing a break from it all and realizing that I'm doing it because this is what I was taught, but it's unnecessary, it's all-encompassing, and that's how I slowly started to let go of it. And also, I think the realization of nothing will happen if I let go of it. The world is not going to end. We were taught that we're actually holding up the world through our Torah study, but that's also not true. If everyone stops studying Torah today, nothing will happen. So yeah, there was a lot of that. And I will add to this as well. I think the fact that I didn't want any kids contributed. I think I only realized this later. And I was like, I do not want to go through the system, get married in the system, and have 10 to 15 to 20 kids. And 20 is exaggeration, maybe for the most part. But I didn't want to have kids. So that's another thing. It's not negotiable. You have to have kids as well. So that was another thing. As I was getting to the age of 23, 24, where you're actually already getting old for the dating system. I was like, I have to get out.
Okay, so that's fascinating that you just knew you didn't want to have kids when everybody around you was like, that's just a given. How were you so clear on that? What was the underlying, because
I think firstly, I never had the desire to have kids. I feel like a lot of people just simply have that desire to nurture, to have kids, to bring in the next generation, to have some sort of, I need to leave a legacy or whatever. I just never had that desire. So when people ask, what made you decide not to have kids? I just never decided to have kids. I think you have to have that desire first in order to bring a life into the world and go through that. I just never had it. So, yeah.
Were you able to avoid a lot, like the matchmaking system? I don't know exactly what age Chabad starts to do it, like maybe 21 or something like that. The pressure starts to really, really build, and you start getting women suggested to you just as part of existing. Was that going on for you? How were you able to resist all that?
Yeah, so the dating age actually is becoming younger and younger, I believe. So yeah, I think around the age of 22, my parents asked me, as soon as my brother got engaged, my parents asked me, okay, are you ready? As soon as my older brother, they asked me, are you ready to start dating? And I pushed it off a little bit. I didn't know I didn't want to explain it to them, but I don't want to have kids. I don't want to get married within the system. So I was pushing it off. And I didn't know how to come clean to them for a while. They set me up on a date with someone. I was still religious, but already slowing things down with it. And I said to myself, which is a terrible idea, but I was like, okay, if this works out, then I'll become more religious. And don't do that. Thankfully, it didn't go through. I also didn't want to go on shluchim. I did not want to be a Chabad rabbi. And she wanted it. It was some sort of miscommunication, and she wanted to go on shluchim, and I didn't. So I was like, this is definitely not happening. And after that, I started rejecting any suggestion my parents would give me. And at some point, they sat me down. They're like, what is going on? You have to give us a better reason than just like, oh, I don't think this one will work out. So I said, look, actually, I am not religious. Okay. And this was in the beginning of my journey. So my parents were the first ones to find out that I'm not religious. I was hiding it from everyone else for a while. So much so that my parents a few months later asked me, are you still not religious? Because they see me doing all the things, going through all the motions, because we're having more suggestions. So are you still not religious? And I said, that's right. I'm still not religious, and I'm not going to become religious again.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you mentioned before also that like you kind of kept it hidden. I mean, maybe it's evident, but I still would love to hear from you. Why did you keep it under wraps for so long? And what was it like to eventually kind of go public with it?
Yeah, so keeping it hidden was a decision that I made because we were always taught becoming non-religious is one of the worst things that you could do. We were taught that spiritual death is worse than physical death, okay? And now when I try to tell that to people, they'll be like, no, it doesn't mean now, and it doesn't mean us, and it doesn't mean this, it doesn't mean that. But the teaching was that becoming non-religious is one of the worst things that you can do. There was shame that comes with it within family. I remember people talking quietly about, oh, did you hear that this person has a sibling who's not religious? And, that's crazy. And Nebuff, it's so...
Pitiful.
Pitiful. And so I did not want that for my family. I didn't want that for myself. I didn't want to be pitied or questioned or, I didn't want everyone talking about it. So in my mind, I didn't even know how I'll eventually come out of this. It was like, okay, I'm going to be hiding this for a while. Becoming non-religious is one of the worst things that you could do within the community. So especially as a son of a rabbi who his whole life is around getting people to become religious. So for anyone there to see me non-religious is just, it would be such a conflict for anyone.
Yeah.
So I hid it for 2 years. And I started meeting others in the same space. So I moved to New York, which is regular progression for someone in Chabad that you move to New York, to the area where the Chabad headquarters are, and you go to, that's where you do your dating and studies until you're married. And then from there you move on shluchas. So I kind of started that process of like, okay, I'll be there, even though I'm not planning to get married within the system.
If I may ask, does the smicha, the becoming a rabbi, that happens in New York?
So I did that in Morristown, New Jersey.
Okay, but it's in the greater...
it's in the area, but that it could happen anywhere around the age of 21. There are a lot of yeshivas around the world that have that system, that have that you could become a rabbi through them, and then you get tested. We had a former chief rabbi of Israel, I believe, tested us for like a minute or something, some easy questions. So I moved to New York, and that's where I met others who went through a similar journey like myself, and just bouncing ideas off of each other, like, hey, how do I come out to my family, so to speak, or friends or things like that. And people were just suggesting, take it slow. Don't make any sudden changes. And slowly you'll get used to it. They'll get used to it. Every month I would change something about myself. I would stop wearing the tzitzit, which is these strings that you wear that are very visible. And, as soon as you stop that, people could tell already something's going on. Trimming my beard. Chabad, you have to have a beard, a full beard, no trimming. So trimming my beard was already a sign for sure for people to see that I'm something's going on. The kippah was the last thing that I took off, and so from the time I started to the end, I would say it was 2 years.
Yeah. How did your parents take it? I mean, I know you said they heard it and they checked back in with you, and now at this point it's a very official. How have they been?
My parents are very loving, and they took it very well, I would say. I'm sure deep down they wish I became religious again, because they believe in it. That's the truth to them. But I think they did it in the best way possible, because they don't give me a hard time. They don't try to bring me back to a religious life. They don't harass me about it. There's a little bit of a don't ask, don't tell. So obviously everyone knows I'm not religious, but we don't really talk about it like, oh, what did you do on Shabbat? What did you eat when you were, traveling or whatever? But they know that I'm not religious, that they know I have a girlfriend, which is also taboo within Chabad or religious life. And I would say they've been as supportive as they could be.
Yeah. Are you the only sibling who's not religious? Everyone else is?
Yeah. Out of 11 of us, I'm the only one. Yeah.
Yeah. And is that open attitude of your parents more common? Because on some level, I could conceptualize it that like similar to like the kiruv tactics of like anything you do is okay, and like that kind of thing is a little bit more chill than regular Orthodoxy, where it's like all or nothing and stuff like that. Does that manifest for other people who leave Chabad, or are you lucky that your parents are this open?
I would say I'm lucky that my parents are this open. It really depends on the family. Yes, to the outside world, there's an acceptance of anyone who's not religious. But once you're religious, you can't just leave and do your thing. I know of people who their family did not accept them for a while, didn't talk to them for a while, like, oh, don't show up here unless you grow your beard back. We don't want to talk to you during this time. Don't show up unless you're wearing modest clothing, especially for women. So my parents are, I would say, an exception, but it does happen. But getting to know people from other sects, I would say that you never know how family will take it. I know people who went through Satmar and their family is very accepting. And I know people who went through Chabad and their family doesn't want to talk to them. So each family has their own way of dealing with it. But I do think that within Chabad, it's easier to become more modern or fully leave than it is within other sects. Chabad does give an easier time, I believe. But again,
a bit of liberalism.
Yeah.
A bit of liberalism as a theme, but you never know the individual situation.
Yeah.
What it's going to be like. You're growing up the son of a shaliach of Chabad is such a unique experience. And when you compare that to some people who've left other sects of Orthodoxy, would you say that there are some significant differences in your arc of your journey? Obviously in your upbringing and part of being religious, obviously that was extremely different. As far as leaving, from that point on, were there still significant differences for you as for them?
Well, I got to know a lot of people who left Orthodoxy, and I would say the stories are very similar. And not only within Chabad and other Jewish sects, but even listening to podcasts and interviews on your podcast or Cult to Consciousness or other similar podcasts, just hearing that pretty much everyone has such a similar story, and they're asked the same questions, and they're harassed or given a hard time in a very similar way for the most part. Right. There are some very strict ones where, they come after you, after your job and after everything, but people really, it's actually fascinating how similar it is when someone leaves. Oh, it must have been because you were abused, something happened to you. And this is something that they say in the Amish community and in the Mormon community and everyone else. So leaving, I would say it's similar, but you never know how your family will take it. So there's always that fear. And again, every family takes it differently when it comes to leaving and how they deal with it.
Yeah. And you had specifically mentioned guilt, and I would love to hear more about that from you, because obviously it's a huge part for me. And before I forget, actually, that guilt is what I want to hear from you, but I want to validate 100% that whole spiritual death is worse than physical death, because ironically, that was a huge narrative at Aish. Noah Weinberg, he lived off of that saying. He was constantly comparing assimilation to the Holocaust. And so every intermarriage was another death that Hitler hadn't even succeeded in. And now this intermarriage, this Christina that you were marrying, that was as bad as the gas chambers. Right. Very graphic kind of language, and it was absolutely there. It was everywhere. We had it on on plaques and in our literature. And so you're not alone in hearing that kind of thing. And what I always find funny, and I have two parallels from my life, because I grew up at home we were Aish, and at school we were Zilbermans. And Aish spent all their time telling everybody how they weren't Chabad. And this horseshoe effect of you basically sound like Chabad in so many ways, right? And we're bringing the Messiah. They were extremely messianic also. I remember our family would wonder if Noah Weinberg was the Messiah or not. I think when he died, they laid that one to rest. They didn't go all out, but there was that. And then also Zilbermans, my teachers, they would dress in Yerushalmi. So Yerushalmi look exactly like Hasidim with streimels and striped coats and stuff like that, and speak Yiddish. But they insisted that they weren't Hasidic. Hasidim were losers, and they were terrible, and they hated Chabad the most, by the way. Right. So I grew up absolutely anti-Chabad, and yet they were fanatically devoted to their rabbi who was anti-Chabad. And that was, they would just adore him and follow his every word. And it was like, how they dressed like Hasidim, but insisted that they weren't. And I was like, okay, so you're reading a different book all day long. But that arc of once you become fanatical enough, you're actually just all in the same boat all over again. I keep finding those parallels at different points in my life. I accidentally ended up at an anti-vax festival a few years ago. I'm solidly science, and so I'm all for getting vaccinated as soon as possible. And I was just looking for a festival to go to, and I ended up in this place that was just a bunch of anti-vaxxers. And so I had to stay undercover for 2 days, mostly just I didn't want them to harass me. So I was this undercover vaccinated person surrounded by hippies who were anti-vaxxers, but there was two groups there. There was the far right and the far left. There was the hippies, don't poison our water, and the far right, don't touch us, government. We're free from your... And they were all hanging out together because they agreed on this one thing called don't vaccinate us. And that horseshoe effect, again, of everyone being there. Anyways, that's my little rant. Back to you on the guilt, because it's so common, right? So you mentioned guilt, and I'd love to hear more about what did you feel guilty about? And you did mention that eventually when you finished deconstructing, that guilt was gone, but I'd love to hear more about that arc.
Yeah. So especially earlier in my life, when I was 12, 13, going into my teenage years, there are a lot of things that you're supposed to do on a daily basis as a Chabad person. A lot of studies, there are daily studies, and you have to, study these things before you go to sleep, and if you don't do it, you're not a good Chabad person in some way. And people could ask you okay, so did you already, Rambam was one of the studies that we had to learn. And did you already do your Rambam today? Or people could be discussing it with you. And if you don't know the subject, you're caught. So there was a guilt around not doing those daily studies or slacking off on those kind of things. Later on in life, as I was deconstructing or as I was leaving the religious lifestyle, there was a slight guilt, but for some reason, once I stopped keeping Shabbat and kosher, it wasn't there as much. There was some sort of, I couldn't come out to family and friends because I felt like I'm still doing something wrong, but I have a good reason for myself. But the guilt wasn't as strong as it was when I would skip my studies, my daily studies, or not do my daily. I felt like I'm not a good enough Chabadnik. I'm not doing the right thing. I'm not. When people be like, oh, Zalman, whatever, people will say something like, he's, an upstanding person, a good Chabad person. I would feel like, oh no, like I'm not really up there. I'm pretending maybe to, even doing the daily studies, I would sometimes pretend to do them. So the guilt was there, but interestingly enough, as I was saying, like I went straight from keeping kosher to bacon, which is something that a lot of people after they leave religion, they have a hard time with shellfish, bacon, a lot of foods, even for years later. I just went straight into it and didn't have that guilt that a lot of people might feel. So I'm kind of lucky for that.
Yeah. So it's almost like the guilt was there on the smaller things earlier on where you're more bought in. And as it deconstructed, even the bigger quote unquote sins were not as impacting you at all. And I guess that leads me to my next question. Overall, was there a catching up, or was there a difficulty integrating into a broader society, considering all that you had come from, right? Like you did on one hand, you grew up pretty sheltered on some level, but you were surrounded by just regular life on the other. Was there like a learning curve of some aspects or another? Not just the ability to eat bacon or not, but
Right.
other aspects of life. Sometimes for people, it's like dating or speaking English or getting an education or getting a job. Were any of those like a big gap for you?
Yeah, it is definitely there, and there's still catching up to do even till today. It's been about 5 years now. So yeah, definitely, even just having a conversation with someone who didn't grow up religious. I was asked a few times, like, hey, did you grow up Amish or something? Like, you don't know some of these basic things around culture, movies, songs, anything like that. With dating and, well, my job is actually right now through the Jewish community. So I do work, my boss is religious. So that was kind of easier to get, because within the community, that's definitely one thing there where people help each other, so there was that. But there's definitely a lot of catching up to do when it comes to just day-to-day life. With dating, well, my girlfriend is also someone who grew up religious. We definitely have a lot in common with that, and it makes things a lot easier. But yeah, there's a lot to learn when it comes to even talking to women. I wasn't allowed. I wasn't, I grew up in a boys only school. And so there's definitely a lot to catch up on. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. I was reminded earlier, I've forgotten. First of all, another random thing, Aish was also super into Rambam. I remember my
Hmm.
father finished all of Rambam at some point. And again, these parallels to Chabad, like Chabad inevitably thought of all of these things first because it was older. And then Noah Weinberg was like, I hate Chabad, but let's do all these things that Chabad do. And it's very funny to me. And I grew up hating Chabad by osmosis because literally Zilbermans, especially at all parties, agree that they hated Chabad. Aish, Zilbermans, that's how it was. But then in my mid 20s, I started studying like Hasidus, and I found that I liked it more than any other type. I probably would have stayed on a few years longer if I would have had so much of a happier childhood, because it was like very philosophical and very vague and like this is how the world works kind of like teachings. And I love that stuff way more than I loved like studying like Talmud. And I definitely
Interesting.
felt like I was very regretful that I had not been exposed. If I was already spending all those years studying, I should have been studying like Tanya, especially.
Mhm.
And I remember when I was in the military, actually, I discovered, and I had always stayed away from them, chitas, these like pamphlets.
Yep.
They were like these floppy pamphlets, and you could take them. They were given away from free at all sorts of places, and they were so convenient and portable. And I would highlight them, and I had a huge stack over the years that I actually studied pretty. There was the convenience of it. They had a really nice print, and I'm remembering like all these like Chabad adjacent overlaps. I would never, of course, touch Chabad, but these things that I was doing
Right.
that was fascinating to engage with. And I'm reminded, even as you're telling me things, I have a few more questions for you, but just about Chabad in general, just because it's so
Sure.
like almost exotic to me. Um, the average Orthodox Jewish kid, and like Litvish especially, like non-Hasidic, studies a lot of Talmud all day long. What is like when you spend like hours and hours a day studying as a Chabad kid, what does that actually get focused on?
So yeah, Chabad also focuses a lot on Talmud. There's Hasidus is taught in the mornings before the prayers, I think for an hour and a half. So studies in yeshiva would be from, I think, 7:30 a.m. till about 9:30 p.m. with a lunch and dinner break. Most of the day, though, is Hasidus in the morning up until 9:30, then prayers, then Talmud from 11 till 2 or 3 p.m. And in the afternoon as well, you're studying Jewish law and things like that. And then Hasidus again in the evening for like an hour and a half or something. So you're still, the focus is not actually on Hasidus as much, but anything extra outside of the official studies, you're still supposed to learn, as we said, the Rambam, Tanya, and a lot of people will study the works of the Chabad Rebbe in their spare time. So that's definitely a focus there. Interestingly enough, you were saying how Hasidus had a pull on you in some way, or you enjoyed that philosophy. I enjoyed more Talmud than I did with Hasidus. Hasidus never really made sense to me. It was all this, God goes from this level to that level. I'm like, who cares? And it never made sense to me. But like,
It's very vague.
yeah, very
Very
vague.
vague and very poetic.
But in the meantime, with Talmud, you have, you're not allowed to do this and this and this. Or what happens if two people are grabbing onto a blanket and one person says it's mine and the other one says it's mine. And now we're going to study that for 6 months and figure out whose blanket that is. In some way, that made more sense to me. At least it was kind of tangible.
There was I studied Talmud Shabbos extensively, the laws of the Sabbath, and there was one disenchanting moment for me that it took me years to own it fully. There was basically this rabbinical debate about whether some sort of rodent has skin or not. Basically, that's literally what it came down to. And if it does have skin, you could bruise it, and then bruising it, you die. Literally, you get stoned to death if you bruise it. But if it doesn't have skin, then the bruise isn't a bruise. And then there was this one rabbi, and he's, when the rabbis before us said that it does not have skin, they meant it does have skin.
Oh.
And he literally just removed the word no and did this Uno switcheroo. And it's like, well, if you could do that, then you could do anything.
Yep.
And it all becomes pointless, right? Like, how do you solve a problem by saying like a no is actually yes? And that moment on, I think, it took a while, but that is one of my most glaring Talmudic issues. It's like, you're not using logic, you're not explaining anything away. It's like, oh, it was a typo.
Yeah.
It meant don't.
Yeah.
Instead of do.
Yeah. I think the realization.
Those are the cuts.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I think the realization also, it came to me a little later that, they say shirim panim b'Torah. There are 70 ways to interpret it, the Torah. And the fact that you could pretty much take any word and say, well, by this word, they meant that. And, now with the creation, it says that within 6 days, God created the world. People will be like, well, when it says 6 days, and they try to figure out how it works with evolution, they'll be, with, natural progression, they'll be like, well, when it says a day, it really means 2 billion years or something like that. And, I always wonder, well, if Shabbos is supposed to be on the 7th day, then we haven't gotten there yet. It's still way far away in a few billion years. So how come here this word means this, and then another time it means something else? Or if God can't create a book that you could just simply read, anyone could read and understand it. If anyone could read it and understand something totally different, then it's not a useful manual to life at all.
Exactly. I had similar issues. One, my father-in-law is this big Aish philosopher, and he teaches philosophy all the time. And he was into the Rambam, of course, as usual. And the Rambam has a whole book where he talks about science and explains how the world works and how the sun revolves around the earth and stuff like that. I was like,
Right.
I was like, how can you look to this book where he clearly got this wrong and then say everything else is right? And now he starts engaging in this hair splitting of like, no, when he talks about natural sciences, he's only referring to what he knows. But when he talks about the God's word of God, and of course he's tuned in completely. I was like, okay, that's a very convenient distinction to make. Meanwhile, and this is something that always bothered me later on, Aish Torah had all these proof seminars and stuff like that, and they would point to, well, you see, when the Torah predicted that there was only 7 kinds of kosher animals and we haven't found any other ones, you see that the Torah actually understood natural science. Or the rabbis predicted the exact number of stars, which A, they didn't,
Right.
but B, more importantly, suddenly you do, when it feels like it for you, when it's convenient, start looking at the natural world to prove your point. Pick a lane. And very similar to that, there was another thing about exactly that, the interchangeability of it. Oh, a general criticism that I had is like, you've got this like absolute truth, right? And especially when I left religion, people would be like, oh, I have this one rabbi and he lives in Nachlaot and you should go talk to him because he's got this amazing Torah and you would so connect with him and he's exactly what you want. And screw all those other rabbis. They don't know. I was like, how could it be that the word of God is so amazing and beautiful? Well, not only the Jews have it, but only this rabbi in Nachlaot knows how to read this specific book in such a way that it sounds great to you. But all the other rabbis who actually were kind of taking the text pretty literally and kind of like what it says, they were abusive and ego driven. And that's why it's not real. It's like, come on, like I expect more from God, frankly, right? If God is only can't send his message beyond some random rabbi in Nachlaot, then maybe he's not doing a good job and maybe I should stop listening to him. So a similar kind of arc.
Yeah.
Again, like Chabad fascinates me to no end. A couple more questions for you about that. Like one, you said about the Chabad rabbi that he meant well. And I read a lot into that. Does that mean that in reality, there was a lot of like damage done or destruction done or just bumbling around? Like what's the other flip side of meaning well?
I mean, with Orthodoxy in general, the fact that you're telling people that if they don't keep things this and this way, they technically either deserve death or they'll suffer in hell at least for 11 months. There are different opinions of what happens. Some people are told that if you don't behave, you won't come back to life after Mashiach comes. I did not grow up with that, but Orthodoxy just teaches a lot of damaging things. You know, don't do this because your life will be ruined. I thought of an example where if you tell a child that who's not allergic to anything, you tell them that you're actually allergic, deathly allergic to eggs, and don't eat anything that ever touched eggs. And, you know, you go into like a whole thing about it. And then this person now grows up avoiding half of the food out there. Once they find out that they weren't allergic to any of that, you know, there's a lot to relearn, and there's an issue with it. So even if you mean well when you tell people that on Shabbat you're not allowed to do these thousands of things that you're not allowed to do, but specifically with Chabad and with the Rebbe, he would ask people to. So first there was a thing where if the Rebbe tells you something, like you have to do it. Okay, we were taught like if the Rebbe said jump off a roof, you just say, you know, where should I jump or how high or whatever. So the Rebbe would tell someone, okay, you should move to this country, and the person would move there, and then they would reach out and say, look, it's a hard time here, you know, we're not managing. The Rebbe would say, you know, just give it an extra push, do the extra thing. The Rebbe was always pushing people to do more and to add more, and even if you're not feeling well, even if it's not going well, like God will bless you for doing these things. We grew up around all these stories where you're supposed to suffer through it. There was a story of a Chabad rabbi who suffered all his life on shluchus, but the Rebbe told him, you know, just stay there, and he, you know, I think concluded his life there, and you know, he lived his whole life just suffering through it. The Rebbe just pushed people to do more, just keep more. I forgot about this part. You're not supposed to enjoy life either. We were always taught, you know, don't enjoy pizza and ice cream. Don't enjoy just regular mundane things. Like you're supposed to be sitting and learning. You're supposed to be always adding more and more. And I think that's pretty damaging. And I'm probably forgetting half of other things. It's like, you know, when someone says, tell your best joke, and you suddenly all the jokes go you're totally out of your head. So
yeah,
it's just.
No, those are great examples.
Yeah.
Noah Weinberg was very similar, very pushy, kind of dictating what you want. If you do what you're comfortable with, you're just slacking and you're neglecting the Jewish people, and you're not attacking your true potential. He wrapped it in a lot of like self-help kind of like stuff. And I remember, it's similar, especially with Zalman's, more so than my parents at home, because Noah Weinberg had this whole thing about pleasure and how life was actually meant to be enjoyed, but he had very specific ways. And maybe he was counteracting Chabad, but at school we were taught, there's a Talmudic quote that everything that you eat becomes the maggots feed on whatever you eat. And we were taught that when I was taught as a fucking 8-year-old or something, that when the maggots eat your body, you can still feel it. Wow. You can still feel like the decomposition. And so the more emaciated you are, this is fucking nuts. I've never said this out loud. The more emaciated you are, the better it is, because you're basically halfway to dead, still alive. But if you're like fat from like having just eaten all that pizza and ice cream, then you're gonna that's just, you're going to suffer extra. And of course, the Sabbath is the one exception where you're allowed to gorge yourself and be a complete pig.
Right.
So that would, the rest of the week, you're not anything on Sabbath. You do whatever you want and eat way too much and feel shitty. Those are the two options, essentially. So yeah, I love the part. And it's, I appreciate the matter of fact is because a lot of people I interview weren't that religious or stuff like that. And they're like, I love how you're saying it like it is, because I grew up with very similar hardline type of text. And people are like, no, it doesn't say it. I was like, it's all in the Talmud. You want me to quote it to you? Like, I spent way too many years of my life doing it. So don't tell me it's not there. And
It says,
you have a rabbi.
it's even more
there.
than that. Anything we're saying here, it says even worse in the
It's
text.
toned down. It's toned down.
Yeah. I've tried explaining to someone recently where the Rambam says, and no one actually, removes that later, but the Rambam says, if someone is an Epicurus, if someone doesn't believe in a God or says God doesn't exist, you're supposed to,
push them into a pit.
Yeah, you have to, if they're in a pit, you're supposed to take away the ladder and have them die, basically, because they have no way of getting out. And I was explaining this to someone, and they're like, well, nowadays it's different. I'm like, show me a text that even says that it's different. And if the Rambam is, if he knows what he's saying, then you can't just change what he said. Like, this is what he says.
Yeah.
It just gets crazier. And technically speaking, nowadays, that is technically still the expectation that you would take away a ladder or have someone die if they don't believe in a God or they denounce God.
Exactly. And I'd like to bring similar proofs around Jewish attitude towards non-Jews, which is considered fostering anti-Semitism. Like, it says so in the fucking book. So like, maybe throw out the book and and it's similar, almost exact same law. If a non-Jewish person is at the bottom of the ladder and you can get away with it, you pull away the ladder. And some say, no, it's only if he's an idol worshiper, which again, all Christians are supposedly considered. So we're back where we started.
And what's wrong with
and then the other one,
sorry.
Yeah. And then the other one is on Sabbath. This is one of my favorite quotes. Like, you're not allowed to save the life of a non-Jew on the Sabbath.
Yep.
Nowadays, we do it because we don't want them to be mad at us, but you're actually breaking the Sabbath and you don't have any good justification, because a non-Jewish soul is basically not even worth breaking the Sabbath for.
Yep.
You're sitting on your couch, shoving stew in your face, stuffing chalent in your face, and that is exactly what God wants you to do. And your nice old Jewish 80-year-old lady across the street is having a heart attack. You are not allowed to go and turn on the defibrillator because it's a complete waste of the Sabbath.
Right.
That kind of shit. It's everywhere and it's destructive. And when you call it like it is, nobody can really handle it, honestly. Like, the people who stay religious is just because they kind of ignore that stuff. Anyways, that's the rant. Last question for you, just because I'm so curious. There's so much military analogies in Chabad. I always find that fascinating, and I find that fascinating in a lot of cults. I remember Shambhala Buddhism. They have these like berets and stuff like that. Zionism, which I consider a cult, also has a ton of like military glorification. Chabad had the mitzvah tanks, and you reminded me of this because like when you would go on Fridays, you would go on operations on Friday, right? You would have military missions to put on tefillin. What is it with all the military analogies, if you have any clarity from
I'm not sure. Also, as kids, it was Tzivot Hashem, the army of Hashem as well. The kids would, all the studies that we did was like for the army of Hashem, of God. I mean, a lot of these words I didn't fully understand. Mitzvah was just a word that we used. It was just, but it means military operations. I can't tell you off, straight out why it's like that, but it's just.
I mean, I have theories. But sociologically, the military, what it asks of you is blind devotion. That is what the military means, and in life or death, right? So the stakes are very high. And you're going to therefore be blindly devoted because the leader is going to get you through this. And that is what many, many cults ask of their people.
Right.
They're asking exactly that. The stakes are very high for whatever it is, and you're going to follow me. And so it can be very useful to borrow analogies from other places, essentially, right? Ironically, Noah Weinberg and my father to this day, they draw all these analogies to Nazism for the same reason. It's very convenient. The Nazis were this machine that killed people. We're going to be a machine that saves people, and that kind of like the steamroller kind of analogy of we're going to roll through the world and give them the truth. It's really all there. The last few questions for you. This has been awesome. One is do you have any general advice for, I'd like to ask anybody who's left, right? You're in the middle of it all. What really worked for you? Any advice for somebody else in your shoes? There's all these challenges. Is there any resources you'd recommend? Anything like that? Like, stage is yours to advice for others.
I think the best advice is take it slow, take it day by day. see what works for you. So it really depends on the stage. If you're questioning, don't let the idea of, we're not allowed to question these things. That's the sign that you should question it. If you are leaving, slow, deliberate steps to integrate yourself, read more, listen more, get to know people who've gone through a similar journey, I would say. For me here in New York, there's such a large ultra-Orthodox community here. So there are so many people who left the community are in New York. So just meeting other people and talking it over, listening or reading about people who left other religions, seeing the similarities and learning from that and being like, wow, I'm not crazy for leaving. Everyone has the same kind of religion. And a story I always tell is, I was listening to on Cults to Consciousness, the story of someone who grew up Amish. And she said, in our family at home, we had these blue curtains, and that shade of blue was too modern for our neighbors who are also Amish, who would say, wow, that family really has, these blue curtains. And then realizing it was similar in my community where, this kind of hat, if you wear your hat a little bit like this way or that way, or the brim is a little smaller. So it's very healing just knowing that we're not crazy for leaving. There are others. People have done this before. It can be done. Get to know why you're doing it, but also and you don't have to have the best reasons to leave something, okay? And you don't have to suddenly learn and study everything that there is to know in order to leave something. I don't think someone who's leaving the Moonies has to know every single part of it and every single part of the history of the Moonies versus just being like, hey, it's not for me and I got to leave. So I feel like taking it day by day, getting community, getting someone on the other side, people to help, people to be with.
Amazing. Amazingly said. You're reminding me, to me, I found it particularly revelatory and healing to hear from Muslims, because actually Orthodox Judaism and Islam are actually closer than Christianity in a lot of ways. And hearing what they put up with and what it means to leave Islam, I found that particularly eye-opening. It took me longer to get to the Muslims because there was this distance and politics and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. When I did, it was really eye-opening. And you reminded me of the classic atheist kind of principle, which I think it's Dawkins or, Hitchens, one of the two, talks about the dragon in the garage. If somebody tells you that there's a dragon in the garage, the onus is on them to prove that there's a dragon in the garage.
Yep.
And short of that, you can do whatever you want. So this whole prove to me that God doesn't exist, it's not actually how it works. And I wrote an article on the principle of the null hypothesis in science, which is how we live every part of our life and how we've stayed alive to this day, and how we get vaccinated and cross the street. It's all science. And in science, the principle is the null hypothesis. The starting point is zero, as in it's not true. And you have to prove that something is anything but zero if you want to get it recognized. So starting point is always zero. And that's how the scientific method works. So start with it being zero and let them prove it. You don't have to be the one to do it. Yeah. So exactly that. One final optional thing, if you would like, I've been asking you a lot of questions. Is there anything that you would want to ask me? I usually like to leave that at the end, if you want.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by, Aish and kiruv and everything. And I just wanted to hear have you gotten someone to become religious? And if yes, did you reach out to them after? Did you fix that?
That's a great question. I was fortunate enough that I was really never that charismatic. It's funny because I'm fairly charismatic, but I wasn't charismatic in the very specific sort of manipulative Aish way. And I think part of it never really worked for me enough that I could speak to it so openly, that I never really was that influential in someone's life. There was a few people who absolutely became religious in my house and I was there, but I don't feel like I was a perpetrator. I was 17 or 14 and they watched, I was just part of the household. You know how it is.
Yeah.
And then I got married at 22, 23, kind of almost became a campus rabbi at UC Santa Barbara. And that would have been interesting because I think I would have been a terrible campus rabbi, but I didn't even get the job. And shortly thereafter, I just got a job in making Jewish films and then working in promoting Israel and Nefesh B'Nefesh. And then And then I was out after that. So I never was in a classic kiruv leadership. I did the occasional Shabbaton as a rabbi, but that's the classic, like, drop in a bucket, you just give somebody a good experience thing. It was never, I made this person religious. Interestingly enough, Rachel, who I've interviewed and was also on Calls to Consciousness, she was in it for way longer. And I think she talks about it directly, about that arc. And there's a whole other weight to carry when you did do that to people. So there's definitely things I did in my childhood that I regret, that have had long-term impacts, but thankfully none of it has been like making other people religious. I do say that I'm really happy that Freedom Fighter, my website, exists, because it's like a carbon offset for all of that stuff. There's Aish.com, and they're doing and I'm doing what I can to be like the anti-kiruv website. And I occasionally get emails from people like, oh, thank you, this was super helpful, I appreciate it. And those are super meaningful to me, because it started out as me venting and just being mad on Facebook. And eventually I just took those posts and put them on a special website. At the time, I was web designer for Yeshiva World. I worked for all the biggest Orthodox Jewish news sites, except for CO Live, actually. CO Live, they remained independent, but all the other ones, Liquid Scoop and Vosses Nias, all of those I personally designed myself.
I grew up with it.
Yeah, exactly. Those are the sites of the Orthodox Jews in America. And I felt, and I was an atheist at that point, but that's similar to maybe what you might relate to. That was where it was easy to get a job. And that it was easy to stay in that orbit for a lot longer than I wanted to.
Right.
And I felt, okay, I'm kind of enabling a lot of this shit that I absolutely don't believe in, but along the side, I'm using my web design skills to also have this news site. So at least I'm offsetting some of it in some way. And I still feel that way. And thankfully I'm more out and more distant from that at this point. Yeah.
Right.
That's a great question.
Yeah, that's awesome, actually. Yeah. And a follow-up, I was wondering if, you're saying that you have a website where, you teach people who want to leave the community, where, they go to and kind of read things that maybe they didn't think about. What do you think about the tactics, using similar tactics to what the Aish and Chabad uses, of going in the streets and being like, hey, excuse me, are you religious? Did you have bacon today? Or maybe just having a stand in like a religious community. What are your thoughts around that?
So for sure on a parody and humor level, I love it. I have one of my favorite articles on my own website, is called an interview, Schmoozing with the Shagets, it's called. And it's a fake interview written as if I was Mishpacha magazine, because I hate their style of writing, where they interview me as this anti-kiruv rabbi. And every time they talk to me, I'm in a different sinful position. I'm eating a hamburger. Now I'm doing heroin under a bridge. All the usual tropes of someone who's left Orthodoxy. And it's exactly that. I'm being fanatically anti-religious, the way Aish is, but in the other way around. And it's parodying those places back to themselves. And then also what really entertains me is people who will like stand next to like the evangelical guy on a college campus with a megaphone who's anti-abortion, and they stand next to him and they quote either like weird stuff. They quote like the Book of Satan or Pastafarianism, or I saw a guy at an anti-abortion marching and reading these crazy, gory excerpts straight from the Old Testament, right? Because it's right there. And like people are like, what are you reading? It's like, it's reading the Bible, right? So I love that kind of stuff. And actually my website is all about being sacrilegious, being irreverent, not just like, here's proofs that God doesn't exist. There's lots of proofs that God doesn't exist. I approach with like humor and diffusing the intensity. But on a deeper level, I actually don't believe in those tactics at all. I believe that we have within ourselves the mechanisms to figure out what's good for us in a way that is organic and real, and nobody needs to be pushy for us to do it. So I would be unethical of me to engage in those same tactics. It's gone so far as occasionally, this was very memorable, some parents approached me about their daughter who'd becoming more religious with a kiruv rabbi. Actually, the guy who got the job at UC Santa Barbara instead of me, we were chavrusas. We were in the same kiruv program. He got the job and I didn't. We're 10 years later, and he did kiruv on this woman, and her parents were freaking out. They found my website, came to me. I was like, I'll talk to her, but like, there's actually very little you can do with an adult who's choosing to do their own thing. I'm not going to coerce anybody else. I actually don't believe in free will, but I believe in that illusion of free will, as in letting people live their life, especially as adults, and do what they need to do. There's very little that we can intervene in other people's lives. And Noah Weinberg and the Lubavitcher Rebbe didn't understand that. They didn't understand this basic premise of like human liberty, right?
Yeah.
So if I believe in that, I'm going to stand on that, even if you're doing the wrong thing for the most part, right? That's generally going to be my stance. It's the classic liberal trap in a way, but I will still, err on that side of things. I'd say that's the gist of it. It's like one of the ways this comes up as I speak more and I talk more, and some people admire me, maybe somehow, I don't know. Some people have asked me like, what should I do here and there? What do you say about this? What do you say about that? And I have a background in like mental health training. I'm a hypnotherapist. People come to me with all of that, and I constantly try to be careful of that very tempting thing to be the guru or somebody who dispenses advice.
Right.
And I specifically, I'm afraid of that. I know that I probably have it in me with my father, and I've been exposed to it for too long. So having a healthy fear of your own influence is not a bad thing to have. And specifically, I like to just constantly remind people, like, what do you think? What do you want? And what's coming up for you? Like, people come to me for advice around how to be independent, right?
Right.
How do and I'm like, no, you're missing the point. Like, I can't even help you there, right? And so you could do the therapist thing of like, how does it make you feel? That's fine. But that's the extent of it. So a very long way of answering your question, but hopefully that conveys it.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Also, well, thank you so much, Zalman. It's been fascinating to get a glimpse into a world that is like across the street from me growing up and a million miles away at the same time. And your journey is a fascinating one. And so thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on. And what you're doing is very important. People do need to hear about others who left. It's very healing, just knowing that you're not alone. Find people out there, and and keep doing what you're doing. This is awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Belief. If you found the episode inspiring, please share it with others who might benefit from it, and be sure to subscribe to it to get updates about future episodes.